OCN, raise our hands up for our Creator, whoever we believe in Him, giving thanks for this day, giving thanks for the ability for us to be, to walk, to talk, to see, to hear. We give thanks to our Creator of all things, for our life givers. For without our life givers, we wouldn't be here. Not just our ancestors, but the air that we breathe is a life giver. The water that we drink is a life giver. The ground that we walk on that supports us, that sustains the land, that which grows from the ground, and the rain that brings everything to life, and the sun above all that brings all to life. So these are all life givers, and we give thanks for these things. We raise our hands also to the people of this territory, the Musqueam people, the Tsleil-Waututh people, the Squamish people. We raise our hands. We say hi to God for allowing us to live on this beautiful land. We've raised our children. We've gone to school here, worked here. We cried, we've laughed on these beautiful lands. Last night I sang the Coast Salish anthem, a gift to all Coast Salish people, and I'm a song creator as well. So I learned to listen to how we believe, and this song came to me at a great time of need, and it's called the Sun Song, Song First.
As each people came into being, they were put on a land that looks like them, and given a language that sounds like that land, describes that land in relationship to all those things. As each thing came into being, it was given its own ceremony. So that's how we know our relatives. And when we know all those things, we know how to do our ceremonies to keep the balance between those things.
Beautiful words. Welcome, everyone. My name is Kim Haxton. I'm Potawatomi. I am from a place called Wasauksing, and I am a settler here on these beautiful lands in this territory. And it's a real honor to be a part of this series, to host and to hear other people's stories, you know. And last night, I see Renee up there, and Renee, and there was a couple of other people, and shared stories of they came over the mountains, and it was really beautiful, their work. And tonight is a little bit different because we've got people that are from the coast, you know, and we don't always recognize that as settlers. You know, what does that actually mean as people from the coast? And it's very distinct. And so I want to introduce everybody, or I want you to introduce yourselves, and who you are as you bring yourself into the room, who you are, who your people are, and a gift that you've received from your ancestors.
I see you looking at me. Hajkasiam. Anta Zukamawat. My Indian name is Zukamawat. I just finished eating before I came, so excuse me. Everyone knows me as Kat Norris. My given names are Kathy Anastasia Norris. My grandmother loved the story of the Russian princesses, so she wanted me to be named Catherine Anastasia Norris. But yeah, I am very Coast Salish, but also on my mother's side, I'm Coast Salish from one of the Gulf Islands, Haxton, and her
great-great-grandfather, my great-great-great-grandfather, was full-blooded Scottish. I learned this when, as an activist, speaking and talking about my people, and I would say, "Hello, everyone. My name is Kat Norris, and I'd like to say that I'm 4 shades brown." Exactly. And so my auntie one night, she asked me, "So how do you even start talking?" I couldn't even get up in front of a crowd, not even in front of a classroom. So I told her that's something I say just to make people laugh. And she goes, "Kathy, don't you know that your great-great-great-grandfather was full-blooded Scottish?" And I said, "No, he wasn't." "Yes, he was." And like I prided myself on being 4 shades of brown. So showed me a picture, and he looks like a taller, skinnier version of Harrison Ford in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Like, oh, so I said that's why I like what is that movie with that the guy that went to war for his people? Oh, that's why I like Braveheart. And on my father's side, my grandmother is full-blooded Nez Perce, and we're also part Hawaiian Filipino on that side of my family, and somewhere on my mother's side of the family. So we have a lot of mix as well as everyone here in the audience, or most people. Yeah, I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, I'm 65 years old. I'm an elder counselor with Vancouver Aboriginal Health, former school support worker, former outreach worker with the Cedar Project, a joint project between Aboriginal, the UBC, and Providence Healthcare. And that's after graduating from Langara College. Before that, graduated from Native Ed, Family and Community Counseling course with a 4.26 GPA.
What's your gift?
My gift that I bring, or that I received. Oh, I think as a child, as a baby, my gift from my grandfather, in our culture, our Coast Salish culture, we're given gifts, and it could be from an auntie. And if you ever go to the Friendship Center, you see me at Powwow night, or even West Coast People's Night, a lot of new mothers, they bring their babies over to me, and it's just unconscious, and I don't ask for it. I've never stated why, but it's something that they do, so I give them a gift. My gift from my grandfather was people will know you. People will know you when you walk into the room. People will see you. So I accepted that gift as an adult when I was the most insecure person in the world. I was the least confident person of all my friends because of my childhood issues, residential school. And so my gifts from my grandfather, I will know what to say. You will always know the right thing to say. And my mother told me these things so many times they became a part of me. And the part, the part that makes me choked up, I've always talked about my grandfather, but I didn't really know him. But because I didn't really have a father figure in my life, my parents were in arranged marriage, but my mother was went to residential school. She was 16, till she was 16. She wanted a career that was, in her mind. She wasn't happy, so it didn't work out, so she was put with my stepfather. And so I never really felt that like I was loved by a man. So my mother always talked about my grandfather, and that's part of what our culture does to us. When someone talks to you about your uncle or your grandfather, they're telling you about them. It's coming from that grandfather or that auntie, that uncle. So it's something I learned to believe, and so I take the pride in that I was loved by my grandfather. He did the protection ceremonies for me. The first rain, big rain, the first flowers that started to grow, he'd bring me outside. before I went out fishing, he would say a prayer and touch me down to the water for protection. So that's the gift that I bring is, the gifts that I received from my grandfather, hence my people, hence my family and my mother. So I raised my hands to her. So everything I've learned from my childhood, the teachings that I received from my grandfather, through my mother, my aunties, is what I do when I do my work.
The island is candy Jocelyn is can hat lasses langat killa hoyak. My brothers, my sisters, all you good people, I'm very happy to talk with you. The is hat aken. Kachakas diu kwalaken. Chatlanas hat I udi ejum. Kansanga hinudika ang iskan koda hangas iskan katu kun kansanga hinudika ang Heidelberg's dos aging. I'm of the northern Haidas. East are lava rocks that have been fused together, symbolizing something very old and sort of a suggestion of a complete unit unto itself. And Kachakas diuk I'm from the Eagle tribe. Tsatlana hatai udi ejin, my crest is an eagle with two heads, Tsatlanas. And Kaunsanga is what I'm called. It's not a name, it's not a label. When my uncle gave that name to me, well, the first one name was given to me was a little boy, was Koda Hangas. Kotla means to sit down. Hangas is something unpleasant to look at. Ugly sit down. Gee, good looking kid too. But see, the name is, you can look at every name sort of has two sides to it because it said nothing was ever made with only one side. So in a way, it has one translation to remind me. It's sort of like when Caesar would ride through the Colosseum on a chariot and the crowds were cheering. There was a slave laying in the bottom shouting up to him, "Remember, you're just a man." So it's to keep from us from trying to make ourselves bigger than we are. Then when I graduated from university, my uncle gave me the name Kitu Kun. Kitu Kun comes from the time of the ice. Some people came from the north, and we called them the cloak people because they had these huge skin cloaks on, and they saw my ancestors doing what they call walking the water. And so they wanted to learn how to do that so they could continue their journey. In exchange, they would teach us how to get that skin. Well, the skin came from what's called a short-faced bear, giant brown bear. And what it was the man would go out and challenge to a fight. And he had a spear that was so 6-7 meters long. And the bear would charge at him, and he would set the butt of the spear, and the bear would rear up on its hind legs and then come down on its prey, and he would guide the spear so it impaled itself. And if the butt of the spear slipped, he was lunch. So it's the butt of the spear, but it's also the one who faces adversity. I started university in 1959. I didn't graduate until 1972. There were just too many things got in the way. But then when I graduated in law school, then my uncle gave me the name Kawan Sanga. Kawan is walking, Sangai is day, but that's a man who walks in the room carrying a newborn child, someone who brings a special day, and he said that's a responsibility. But I was born in Alaska. My father was Haida, the northern Haida, and his father's mother, her parents, the father was Tlingit, we call Slangas, and the mother was Haida, and she married a Scotsman named William Morrison, so my last name is Morrison. And my mother was Cherokee from Oklahoma, and her grandfather was a Scotsman. I was told that makes me double stingy. They say many, many terrible things, huh? But anyway, so I grew up in Haida Village in Heidelberg, Alaska. And we didn't have residential schools on that side of the border. In our village, we had an elementary school that was run by, it was a government school, so all the teachers were civil servants. So we weren't really abused in the way what happened here. So what we were being taught was without it being filtered through the church. So it's quite a bit different, a lot of it. And I went to school in Lawrence, Kansas too. There were four major schools in the States, Indian schools they call them. One in Oregon, Chemawa Indian School. My two younger sisters went there. And then the one my parents, when they met, was Sherman Institute in Riverside, California. And then the one I went to, Haskell Institute, was in Lawrence, Kansas. And Lawrence, Kansas is where Kansas University is, and that's where all of a sudden his name popped out of my head. He won a gold medal in the Olympics. He's Lakota man, I think. I'll remember his name in a few minutes. I have one of these lightning memories, one flash and it's gone. And then the other Indian school is called Carlisle and was in Pennsylvania. And one of my teachers was a man named George Nix who went to Haskell, and he was the first American Indian to be named an All-American football player, but he was one of my teachers. So I've been in Vancouver now since 1990. Before that, I lived in Alberta for 3 years. I came here, and I got a job working in the movies as a cultural consultant on a movie called White Fang 2. And then they kept me for Man of the House, and then I went down to the States. They called me to work on this Free Willy 2. And I came back, and I got a call to work on the X-Files as a story consultant. And I thought, my God, these people are all crazy. I could be king. So that's what I did for 17 years. So anyway, so I've been here, and the gift, I guess I might say that I was given, I was selected at birth, and at 3 years old, my grandfather, who was born in 1878, took me to meet the history keepers. Actually, it's a term, it's a very long name that translates to, he always remembers what happened way over there. So they started my training then, and they taught me how to strengthen my memory, how to remember things. And that's really stood me in good stead. And what I'd really like to be able to do is to work with young people and teach them those techniques that were taught to me. And the only ones who were taught the history were the ones of us that were selected at birth. And then our responsibility was to take the histories and create myths so that the lessons learned by that historic event would be in that myth. And so people were free to change it to however they wanted the message to go. But if we tell them the history, they change the history, so they didn't teach the history. And to my knowledge, I'm the last one. So I guess that's what my gift was give them the ability to remember things. But I forgot. See, that's the other thing, is you have to be able to, your life begins the first time you laugh at yourself. And see, when you laugh, your mind is hot. You're going to hear everything. You're not going to censor anything. So that's what they would do to us.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name's Ronnie Dean Harris. The ancestors know me as Quila and Malithuk, two names I got when I was quite young. Quila comes from a place called Skowlitz. It's right where the Harrison River meets the Fraser River. My great-grandfather gave me that name when I was about 5 years old. And it's the male version of my mom and my sister's name, who their name is Qualathwet. And then when I was 11, I was given another name at a ceremony in Musqueam. in 1991, and that the name is Melithuk. And Melithuk was the name of Chief James, who was a chief at Yale around in 1914. He testified in the Royal Commission in 1914, and so he was very vocal about salmon fishing and our rights in land back, way back in the days. And so I was given this privilege of carrying that name and forever telling you his story. What am I supposed to talk about again? Oh yeah, so my families come from Stalo, Statlium, Inglekapok territories. More specifically, my 3 times great-grandfather is Chief Coquitlam, where the town of Coquitlam gets its name from. So if you live there, you're welcome. My other family comes from Seabird Island, Yale, Spuzzum, Mount Currie, Port Douglas. My one white ancestor, I'll tell you about him. His name was George Perrier, and he was the judge in the McGowan's War. I was leaving this portfolio, like I do a lot of genealogical family research, and I was like, I've got one white ancestor somewhere, and I was like, I'll research him down the road somewhere, and I just found out he was the justice of the peace during this bloodless war. You guys probably learned it in like history 11 or 12, McGowan's War. That's my ancestor. That's my one white ancestor. So I'm French Canadian. So I'm an expert on French Canadian now that I've learned about my French Canadian ancestor. So I grew up in a place called Albion, British Columbia, which is in Maple Ridge. It's a small racist fishing town, and I got out of there as soon as I could. When I came here to the city, I was probably about 13. I started sneaking out of Albion when I was about 12 years old, and I would sneak out to after-hours clubs and try to find breakdancing and rap and b-boying and stuff. And I stayed here. I've been here. Well, I moved to the city when I was about 13. I left here in 2014. So, and my first dream was trying to be a rap star. That was what I wanted to do. Music took me around the world. It was the one thing that was allowed me to like activate who I was and to challenge, to escape the limits of origin for one, right? To escape the limits of socioeconomic structure and to escape that small town mentality. And so, hip hop was allowed me to create a character in which I could not be the skinny-legged Indian kid who didn't have a father, and I could be bigger than life. And so hip hop got me on television. So I did a television show called Moccasin Flats, where I played a rapping drug dealer, and then I did another film called The Road Forward, where I worked with Rosemary, where I did a homage to George Emanuel in that film. And so right now I actually am the voice of Dad, a.k.a. Walter, on a PBS series called Molly of Denali, which is the first TV series in U.S. history to have an indigenous girl as the lead, and it's an animated series based on a little Alaskan girl. And so I play her dad. Now I live in New Westminster, so I've lived there since October last year, and my work now is as a cultural researcher and programmer with the Massey Theatre. And to preface that, around 2016, when they mentioned that Donald Trump was running for president, I stopped watching Hollywood TV and film, and I canceled my Netflix, and I canceled all my accounts, and I stopped because I knew that there was something wrong with television and film. It was programming us to be crazy and whatever. And I dove into research. I lost touch with a lot of the rap stuff in my life. I was going to start this marketing design firm, and I was going to get a collared shirt, and I was going to like get an SUV and try to be that guy, you know what I mean? And I got to this point where it was killing me inside. Like literally I was like dying because I wasn't on a stage and I wasn't doing what activated me. And so I figured that I was asking these questions about rap, and I was like, there's a huge movement in hip hop where we're, especially native rappers, we're the voice of our people, rap, we're the voice of our people. And I was like, I'm the voice of my people. Then I was sitting there and I was like, am I the voice of my people? And then I was like, have I even listened to my people? And then I was like, So I started researching. And I said, if I'm going to be an expert at anything, it's going to be an expert at myself and my family history and at my people. And so I have a few doctoral piles happening with things that I'm trying to understand and trying to untangle. But for the most part, it's all personal understanding. I don't go through academic. I'm not a high school graduate. I was an art kid. But now we're working on a few different things with the Spuzum First Nation, Coquitlam First Nation on nationhood cases and title support, also with local school districts to create curriculum based upon some of this research, place names, history, cosmology, historiography. And so now I'm a research dork. And so I brought some of that here to share with you here today. And I think the gift that most recently for me from the ancestors is the fact that they interact with me, not through dream or through sickness, but through research. And like when I find an ancestor through genealogical research, it's like you have to set a table for that ancestor you've just introduced yourself to and that you've introduced your family to. And I get to meet and see many people's ancestors on a daily basis. And I tell them this all the time, but I'm very honored by that. And I tell people all the time, I was like, I've seen your ancestors in this work. You need to go and look. And so that for me, that's the biggest gift. I get to see them a lot. So thank you.
Thank you. It's an interesting journey, I think, as what our identities are from receiving direct transmissions, to uninterrupted cultures and the curiosity to go and look. And I loved how you said in the opening thing, Woody, that was Woody's voice, about the land teaches us how to be. And I mean, you said it obviously way better. But I also want to bring to light that the relationship to that, there's an obligation and a responsibility to the land. And I want to acknowledge our brothers and sisters on the eastern shores, the Mi'kmaq territory, and the work that they're doing, their inherent rights that are being violated, and it breaks my heart. I also want to acknowledge our brothers and sisters on the Haudenosaunee territory of New Caledonia, who are also standing up for their territory. As well, that brings us here with the Secwepemc and the Wet'suwet'en people. And we could probably keep on going all around Turtle Island and different places. But I just want to really bring that into light, because there's something about the way that the system has been set up that has been, it's decimating, or not decimating, that's the wrong word. I need a better word, Ronnie. Help me out with that one. I need a word that describes, it's been an interrupted cultures. So having somebody like Woody here, I'm giving you a big up, Woody, as one of the last old, I'm going to say high knowledge, because I don't know the better word for it, of even probably language, an old language. Language gets filtered and changed. That it's a real honor, to have you here. And then we have somebody like a young person, like Ronnie Dean, who is, who's going through it and is like, what is that identity? What does it mean? And so we're seeing this revitalization. We see it ancestrally coming through, going both ways, right? And I think it's a really important piece that we all carry. I love that you carry song and you carry dance. There's 5 things that are universal for healing: singing, dancing, storytelling, prayers or meditation, or ceremonies, and connecting to nature, which is the most important one, because it's the piece that feeds us. So I have a couple of, sorry, I have my phone up here just so I could check my time. Oh, we got lots of time. Oh, good. I was a little bit worried. I'm like, okay, because I'm with a group of talkers tonight. I thought they were talkers last night, but I'm like, okay. The protocol. There's a protocol in our worlds where you just don't interrupt people, and you sit And sometimes, when we're in the colonial time of you've got an hour and a half and 3 people, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be some bad. But we talked about it before, so maybe I would like to start. My first one is actually about your story of connection to land and on your territory or here and what that means to you. So, Kat, I'm going to start with you again, please. Thank you.
So I just wanted to take a moment to honor those in the audience. In our Salish culture, when you come in, this is our house right now. You're all witnesses to the work that we do in TA, CIS. It's work, for, just to get here, but it's also part of our work as 3 Indigenous people, learning to understand our culture and our ways and the why of our people's struggle. And, I come as someone who I'm more known as an activist, and, before I am, as a performer. And, I'm very honored that I'm sitting here, as someone who was formerly very silent. Ever since I was a child, we lived on our little island called Valdez Island. A lot of people know it as a place to go, and it's similar to the island itself, Vancouver Island. When you see the ads, come to the island, we always say, we don't want people to come to the island. Come to Nanaimo. Nanaimo says, no, we don't want you to come to Nanaimo, because it's getting more and more congested. And I grew up on the island until I was a toddler, and then we kept going back every spring and summer for hunting and to visit my grandfather, who lived in one of the houses there, and we had oil lamps, wood stove. The kids' jobs, our job was to collect kindling for the wood stove, and that was our big job. And our mother would always have us, okay, get ready, go, in our language. And so we'd all run to see who would get the most. She was tricky to get us to go gather, do our job. And our other job was to, bring water into the pail. So we just had, smaller pails and dippers. So I'm really lucky that I had a chance to grow up in a time where someone mentioned last night being able to run through the forest. I mean, it sounds like a story, but it was our reality. You're running, but we didn't think about it as running through the forest. It was running through the trees, and don't trip over branches, And our mother used to go to the other part of Haxton, our island, Valdez, to collect bark. There's trees that drop to bark, or the guys that cut down trees, or even the loggers. There was a lot of bark. So she would take up my youngest brother, who was a toddler, and start canoeing. She always made noise like hoo, hoo. Everything makes me emotional. Sorry. And that was to let the water know that she's here to do work. She has a place to go. Letting the sea animals know that she's coming, so she doesn't scare them, to get out of the way, and also to let us know whereabouts she was. So she would start off, and then she would yell out. She had a whistle. It was, I can't do it. We knew her whistle. Okay, now it was our chance to go. So we'd all take off running to the other part of the island. And we keep watching out for her along the shore. And we ran, and we were about, I would say about a good 100 feet up. And we kept an eye out for her to make sure she was okay. She kept an eye out for us to make sure we were okay. So we'd meet her, and when she got to the other side, we'd help her pull up the canoe, and we'd start piling in the bark and kindling that we found. And so after it got to a certain depth, she would sit back in the canoe, and we had piled a whole bunch of bark by now, and we would pile it on top of her, and then she would say, she would tell us that was enough now. Okay, awa, no more. So we would push her out, and we were scared because the water was this much from the top of the canoe. And she'd start off on to back to the other side. And now we're running, now we're really worried about her watching, making sure that the canoe didn't tip, not that we could do anything. So that's a memory that I hold really strong, is the beauty of this land was a medicine to me as a child, even though I didn't understand it. And then when we left that island to move to Nanoose Bay, to my stepfather's reserve, I always had that memory in my mind, that freedom that we have. But even in Nanoose Bay, we could still play out till it got dark. My mother would whistle, and we'd run. It was time for bath. She had a whistle that was time for bath, a whistle that was time to get ready for supper. And, so that's what I miss, is that freedom. But I always knew the magic, of our land, that's part of my writing. The sound of the wind blowing as a child. Sometimes I would turn when we were down, because down the hill was the beach in Nanoose. Up the hill was where we called our mountain. We were the only house up there. I would turn this way when I was down to the beach, so I could hear the wind. And it was like it was talking to me. And I didn't know that I knew things back then. But all Indigenous people, regardless of whether you know or not, we do know things, but it's up to us to learn to listen to the stories that are being told to you. And so even now, when I'm in the city, sometimes I can smell the ocean, and I put my head up. When I go to the island, I come back to the city, we hit Stanley Park, and you can smell the old growth, you can smell that forest smell. And, I just, if I can open the window, I will. But that's when I put my head up and I put my hand on the window, because I take in that little bit of medicine for that little bit of that part, because a lot of it is still, some of the old growth, flora and fauna. That natural smell is really good medicine to me, and that's what I need today. If they ever got rid of Stanley Park, it would break my heart. I wouldn't know what to do, but yeah. So that land is, the smells. Just looking at it brings back my memory of my childhood and the medicine that our land holds for us. OCM.
What was the question?
Tell me about the land. Tell me about the land of your home, and tell me about maybe then about the land here, if there's a connection for you.
When I was quite small, like I said, when my grandfather took me to my teachers, every session would begin the same way. Outlaw gona, sit down, dear boy. Aji dant kindang song. I'm going to show you something. Dunk ilkidu. Prepare yourself. And it says your mind is like a vessel filled with silty water. You've got to let it settle. So I would clasp my hands here and cross my legs, put my head down, close my eyes, and visualize watching that water settle. And then when it settled, I'd say, and the person would start talking. And it was like I go down inside of them and experience everything they're talking about. And so a part of the process was learning what was called Tlauk Igang. I'm telling the story of all the humans. And a part of that story tells of an incident that happened 15 cycles ago. One cycle is 5,200 years. And about 2 years ago, I was watching the Knowledge Network, and they were talking about this incident that happened 78,000 years ago. A supervolcano erupted in Indonesia. And when the scientists went out to think it was something like 9 meters of ash they dug through, and they found spear points. And they were trying to decide, or sort of wondering if anybody survived it. Well, 15 cycles, 15 times 5,200 comes out to 78,000. The same incident. But it not only tells that we survived it, but it tells how we survived it and what we did afterward. And it tells of as we're traveling across the land, the people start separating. And some went some direction, others went others. And over time, depending upon where they stayed, they started looking different because the light was different. Their hair changed, some of their skin color changed, and this sort of thing. And as we were traveling, trying to get away from all that ashes and try to find life, when they come across water, sometimes they drink it, they'd get sick or die. But they noticed that when the birds would wash themselves in that water, if the water beat it up on the feathers, they could drink it. It was probably okay to drink. But if it didn't, they couldn't drink it. So one person was given the responsibility of carrying the feathers, looking for life. When it come to fresh water, it dipped the feathers in. If the water didn't beat up, they kept going. If it beat it up, that person would drink and the others would wait. If that person had no ill effects, then the others would drink. So those were the keepers of the feathers. And so today, the ceremony has changed. Now we say that the eagle feather is looked upon as sacred because it's the closest thing to Creator. Well, ours wasn't filtered through that, so this was the reason why it was so important, was that you would look for life with those feathers when you dip it in the water. And it says we kept traveling, and it was, my watch wasn't working, so it's around 50,000 years ago, I guess. And that's when, if you look at the tracks on what they call the Bering Land Bridge, they were going the other way. The horses and camels left. And when we got to a place we called, it was called Singai La Eithgyagen. It says the atmosphere was always pleasant, always warm. It was tropical. And that's what the Arctic was until the last ice age. Then it became the Arctic. But at that time, when we first arrived, around 50,000 years ago, it was tropical. And people kept coming and coming. But it took us a long time from the time we were brought into light until we learned to be human. And we became human from eating the marrow of from bones of small animals. It said that's when we began to change how we treat each other. But then when we got to this place, it said that's when we came into being as people. And so each people was put on a land that looked like them. And they were given a language that sounded like that land, described the land and all the beings there. And then we were given a ceremony on how to maintain the balance of that relationship. In Haida, it said it's like walking on the edge of a knife blade. If you're not careful and you don't watch your step, you could slip and fall off the world. And so when you fall off the world, that means that you've given up your ceremony and you've fallen into chaos. And that's what's happened to us. So anyway, 5 cycles ago, which strangely enough is 26,000 years ago when the Ice Age started, we went through climate change like what we're experiencing now. In fact, all the conditions you're looking at now are described in that history. But we call it the organic transfer of knowledge, rather than getting it from technology or from books. It's the organic transfer of knowledge. And so Haida country is right where it's supposed to be. And one way of characterizing it, it says that the earth is filled with magic, it's spirit. And every time you do something, you treat something with a sense of humanity, I'll put it that way. You put some magic, some spirit back in the land. But every time you do something bad or, cause other people harm and pain, you take it away. And so for a long time we've been taking away that spirit, and that's in the land. And so it's said that to be able to relate to the land, there were 4 values that everybody had before they went to residential school. One was trust. When you belong to a clan within a tribe, there's automatic trust. You trust everybody. The second thing is you share. The third thing is you help each other. And the fourth thing is you give back before you take. Residential school said, don't trust, they'll cheat you. Don't share, they'll end up with more than you. Don't help anybody because the only way to the top is look out for number 1. And don't give back because you can never have too much. And so that's what's kind of happened to us. As a kid growing up in the Heidelberg village of, by the name, my English name was Woodrow. Woodrow Morrison Jr., just Woody. But my ancestors tell of getting our first potatoes we got was from a people called people who live under the clouds that hold against the mountains. That's in Peru. That's where we brought potatoes back from. So every year we'd plant potatoes. And in the fall we would go out, in the spring we'd go and prepare the garden places. And one time I got lazy. I was sitting down and this lady came over to me. She's from my clan. She asked, she says, why are you sitting there? I said, I'm listening to it, the blue jay. I'm trying to understand what it's saying. She said, I know what it's saying. I said, what? Slow. That's your hind end. I asked, why is it saying that? She said, because you're sitting on yours and you're not supposed to. Now go get back to work. So that was part of my relationship to the land. But when we were preparing the garden, some of us boys were sent to get these big starfish called a sun star. And from what I understand, they're all becoming extinct now. They're just dissolving in the ocean. But we would get those big starfish, and then the other kids would go and get this kelp you see on the beach, little clusters with bulbs on them. We call that tul. And for those of you who have dried, cracked hands, if you take those bulbs and pop them, that liquid in there, you rub it on your hands and it heals almost immediately. And 2 of the old ladies there at home, they were talking about it, and one was showing the other one her hands. She says, use that tool. So she said she got some, and she told her granddaughter, it started healing right away. And we didn't get telephones there in our village until 1976. And anyway, when they'd answer the phone, they'd pick it up, and they didn't say hello. They'd say, Slau Ejum, is that you? Yes, it's me. And she said, gee, that'll work good on my hands. You think it'll work on my face? Because one nanny from Masset, she picked up her granddaughter, and her face had lots of wrinkles, and the great-granddaughter was touching her face. She said, gee, Nani, your face is all cracked up. The grandmother just laughed. But so what we would do is we'd dig the hole. Boys would go dig holes, and then they would dig another one a little bit deeper, right in the center of it. And then the others would come and take that seed. They would take a piece of that starfish, would cut them up in pieces, and put that down in that little hole and then cover it. Then somebody else would put the potato seed, seed potato in there, and then they would cover it, and then the others would put the kelp on top. And when we finished, we'd just leave it. And we didn't go back till fall time, but there was no weeds. The kelp and the starfish were providing, nitrogen. And these things, then we'd have to go dig them up in the fall time. And we had a elementary school that went, through grade 8, and then from there we had to go away to a boarding school. So there were no teenagers in the village, but lots of kids. And so we grade 8s too. At Christmas time was our we had to go cut down, get the Christmas tree. So we're always relating to the land one way or another, whether it was digging clams, going to get octopus, and then fishing and planting things. So there was always this feeling that I belong to it rather than it belongs to me. Real estate is when it belongs to you, but earth is when you belong to it. So that's my relationship to it. Would somebody get my t-shirt that says, "Help, I'm talking and can't stop"?
We have a code when I do this.
Land. I mean, I never got to really grow up on my home territory for many years of my life. I grew up with my grandparents. My parents were 16 when I was born, so I went to live with my grandma and my step-grandfather in Kwantlen territory in Albion. So the land there for me, I mean, I grew up my whole life on the Fraser River. I really can't imagine not living by the Fraser River. I lived on Nanaimo Street once, and I felt so lost. Like I just didn't know what was going on. People were like, "What's happening on the river?" I was like, "I don't know. It might as well be a million miles away." My grandfather had the same color eyes as the river is. 2 of my grandfathers, right? For me, like the rivers, I think has become very important. The rivers are kind of nations in themselves. We're divvied up into these cultural groupings, Stalo and whatever the nearest band office is and whatnot. But a lot of our tribal groupings were decimated that way because we were aligned along the rivers, not aligned where the band offices were. So, some of the signatures for me, like finding in these stories along the Fraser and all the way up, wherever 2 rivers meets, there's usually a skyborn story right there. So wherever 2 rivers meet, there's usually someone who touched down from the sky. My ancestors, we didn't cross our land bridge. We came from the stars, skyborn, Telswale. It's like the more I hear these stories, the more that I interact with them. I was lucky to grow up with my grandparents because they introduced me to these characters and these concepts. It's at a very young age. And so now that we're sitting here wondering how am I going to introduce concepts like the Transformer and Coyote to my son? And I was like, well, we're just going to make board books. We just talk and make sure these characters are always there. And by the time he reaches my age, he has a deeper understanding of lens of knowledge of when these stories are embodied within him. A story that I found in the last year that I've been tracking is a story that comes from Spuzum. And it was handed down from our chief Pellick. And Pellick was there in 1808 when Simon Fraser passed through the area. Pellick led him through the territory. Chief Pellick was also a guide for Alexander Caulfield Anderson, and he helped him create the HBC Brigade trails, and so that's the trail from Hope to Kamloops. Without those trails, we'd be living in the United States right now. This would have been annexed. 5440 or bust, you know what I mean? But Pellick handed down a story about a guy who was coming of his age, and he's supposed to find a wife, and his mom's like, "You better go find a wife," right? So you go and you find her, and he was sad, and so sends him off, and he goes to this lake, and he's crying, and he's sad, and all of a sudden he looks, and these beautiful girls come down from the sky. They have these beautiful wings and these dresses, and they're playing these flutes, and they go and they bathe themselves in this lake. And he goes and he watches them, and he's hiding out. And he does this for another 4 days. And he goes home, and he's like, "I see these girls, I'm going to take this one as my wife." And so through those 4 days he's watching them, he noticed that the young one always gets out last. And so when she goes to get out, he grabs her wings or whatever, her dress that They flew away and keeps her as a wife and takes her home, and it's like, Mom, I found a wife. Awesome, right? Like, whatever you do, don't give her the wing thing because she'll leave us. Okay? And so years go by, they have a son, and she gets homesick, obviously, for her space family or whatever. And so she talks mother-in-law into giving back the wing. Hey, just let me try it. Just let me show you how it works, and then I'll give it back. And then so she does, and she takes the boy and goes back. And he comes back and says, what did you do, Mom? Oh. And so he goes to see his uncle. His uncle, in short, gives him like this lesson on how to create like a spaceship. To go to this place to find his wife, and he does it. And he gets back, and the father-in-law's like, crap, you made it here. Awesome, okay. You can have her, but you can't sleep with her till 4 days. And obviously he breaks that rule, and she has to go back home. And we don't have happy endings all the time in our stories, and that was the end of it. So that's like the gist of the story. The symbology and syntax I haven't figured out yet. What that means in the contemporary lens of our understanding of reality, I don't know. It's a weird love story. It's a space story. But this is a space story that was told by our ancestors on the top of Mount Baker 11,000, 12,000 years ago when the floods were there. And this story is also common to the ancestors of Capilano and Chief Catalano. When I asked Gabe George about this story, he goes, we have that story. And so these markers, these cultural markers to me, where people are like, oh, that's interesting. I'm like, we've been here. And so when we think about gifts, and we talk about back to gifts, and one of the signatures, one of the tropes or concepts or symbols in the stories that always comes up in these old stories is what I like to refer to as the spark in the shell. The spark in a shell was always like a granny or an auntie or an old lady or something would have the spark in a shell, and it's a seashell with tinder inside and fire. And that's how they used to carry fire. And I think like when I'm handed these things, when my grandmother died, I got like a series of notebooks and papers and stories, and like when all the kids were allowed to run around at the potlatch, I had to like sit and listen, and I hated it, but I had to sit. And like those are the tinder in the shell that they handed me. And so my job is to make this tinder bright, 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 so that when my son Emmett gets it, he doesn't have to tend to it so strongly. And that when he starts to warm himself by these stories, by this understanding, by this consciousness, it's not in the realms of survival like we've been going through. I look at stories and consciousness as this bundle, these bundles, but they're powerful bundles full of our dreams and our stories, and they're full of stars and our connection to land, water, and all things. But we've been running out of survival with these bundles, tripping over rocks, like skinning our knees, trying to survive the floods, the fires, the mosquitoes, the monsters, Stephen Harper, whatever we've got going on today. And I think we're at this time right now, when COVID hit and everyone's like, oh, new rap album? Are you going to write a new rap album? I didn't write one rap song during COVID, but I organized this bundle. And I think if we're talking about our knowledge of the floods, our ancestors knew to encode these stories into things that would outlive the floods, into rock formations, into raven, coyote, into all these things that would transcend and continue to be the tinder in the shell. And I don't fully understand what's coming to me sometimes. They come as messages, and I'm just like, ugh, and I'm juggling these bundles. And it's work that I'm probably going to hand off. But I believe that these place names and these stories are also keys to our understanding of the biodiversity in which we interact with as well. Salmon's a keystone species, right? Like we have old stories of speaking of the kinships with those things. And so My goal right now is to extrapolate those values and principles and to make them accessible to our young people in stages. And so I don't want to call them a test subject, but I have a responsibility to make this knowledge. It's not knowledge if I can't teach it to my son. If he can't walk with it and breathe it and put it on and dance it, then that's useless. And then that's connection to land. Is those stories, that vibration that I feel lucky to be able to walk with, and that's kind of where I'm at, trying to breathe life into that.
That's a great answer, Ronnie Dean. Amazing. What a
I don't live on my land. I don't even live on my reserve. Like, I go back to the reserve and like, oh, city boys here. But I do have contact with my ancestors in those spaces when I go there, and you can't. And I don't care what they say, what they think. They can't defeat that relationship. So, and I think we all have that, and we all have a responsibility. They're owed the recognition for that, and I think we have a responsibility to do it.
Thank you for saying that. I just want to share a quick one that relates to that. I was in Songis on the island, and there were some elders coming, and the elders walked into the room, and I said, "Oh, good, the elders are here." And these gentlemen looked at me, and they said, "We're not the elders." And I was like, whoa. And then in behind them walked this man on a cane, on a, you know those things? Walker, and his eyes were translucent. And this old man came in. His name is Adam Dick, and he was beautiful. He told the story where he didn't go to residential school. He was raised by the elders. The spirits, the ancestors came to his mother before he was in her belly, and she was told by them that it would be the elders in the community that would raise him. So he got raised in the bush. So he's one of the last of the old language of the Kwakwaka'wakw language speakers and systems and the cosmologies of holding all of that. And some of these elders were like, I've been with him for 30 years and I don't have all the information yet. And one of the things that Adam said, and we're going to get into our last question because we're coming to the time, he said, what you don't understand, and it was a room full of young people, he said, is that I was lucky to receive the information direct. He said, what you don't understand is that you have the information here. So Ronnie, when you say that, it is true, you know? There were things that were interrupted due to colonialism, and there's places and spaces when you are on the land, when you hear the wind speak. You know, we often talk about that. I'm like, there's intelligence in the air. There's intelligence in the fire. You know, one of my elders said that to me because I was worried about the fires this summer when we got that hit of smoke, and he said, Kim, the fire has intelligence. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay, of course. So which brings us into our last sort of place. And it's really hard. A stupid time thing. 20 minutes, okay, 20 minutes, everybody.
I'm glad I'm going
We're going to
first.
stretch out this time, in between time. You just took us 70,000 years through time. That was kind of impressive. Very impressive. Thank you.
I always tell people when they're like, man, this is really long, I was like, you've never been to a potlatch before, have you? I just sit there for 3 days once. You can sit for 90 minutes.
Right. And so my last question is in two different places. And so, Kat, my question for you is, how do we begin to restore and repair our relationships that we live overlapped in this land? And however that means to you.
Yeah, that's pretty deep. You can go first. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I'm a residential school survivor, and part of my story is that I went to residential school. So did my siblings, and our parents were the ones who brought us. So up until I was 16, I hated my parents for bringing us there to Kuper Island Residential School, Kuper. And I held a deep resentment. Why did they bring us, knowing what happens there, because they went there? But I found that they asked the Indian agent if they could be the ones to take us, because they didn't want anything to happen to us on the way if anyone else took us. And we got a lot of talks from our grandmother, and my grandmother, and my step-grandmother, my grandfather's new wife, my grandmother had passed, and used to talk to me a lot in our language, and would show me a lot of different things, and she had us go pick medicines for her and tell us what they were, but she was talking in our language. And at the residential school, like, we talk a lot about how they took our language away, but they didn't say little children going into these schools, a lot of them were actually kidnapped by men paid $10 a head, by RCMP paid to pick up children. They're playing by the river. They're just out to play, and they'd grab these kids and throw them in a truck and take them to these schools. And if they say, for example, in Musqueam, if they picked them up from there, they wouldn't take them to a school in Vancouver. They'd go all the way to Lillooet to a residential school, far away. A lot of parents died trying to find their children, died of a broken heart. Because you look at the news today, kids are being kidnapped, and the parents are on the news crying. Where was the news for our parents when our children, as were kidnapped? So our parents, thought there would be more caring for them to bring us. And, by the time I went, we had spoken English, because I'm of the generation where our parents didn't want us to learn our language because they didn't want us to get whipped. They didn't want our tongues to be pierced with a pin, our mouths washed up with soap, or smacked on the side of the head, or whipped down the back of the leg for just talking. That's what happened to my parents and a lot of the elders before them. I was separated from my brothers, which broke my heart, because I was big sister. Nobody messes with my siblings. Even today, I will talk to anyone that hurts my siblings, my brothers. And when they took them away, I said, "Oh no, they stay with me." And the nun looked back at me, "No, they're coming with me." And she said, "No, they're coming with me." I said, "But they stay with me." I tried to use my big voice. That was the last time I could talk to my brothers. In those schools, they separate you from your siblings. They separate us in terms of gender, and you're not allowed to talk to them. It was my youngest brother's birthday, and I ran over. They were walking past the girls' side, and I was warned by other kids, but I don't care. It's his birthday. But when I got there, all the boys were marching, all dressed like Polanka, and and little tiny gray sweaters with a line down the side, the hair cut short like Polanka. And I went like this. And I looked at him. Happy birthday. I just kind of mouthed, and he looked, and we both made a little eye movement. And I got dragged back, into the dorm. So there's a lot of separation of our siblings like that. We went into the school like, we used to run around like puppy dogs, roll around and play. My brothers would jump beside me in bed and read Archie comic books, and we'd run until we were sweating and playing, and we'd lay back in the grass, and we'd talk. I don't remember what we talked about. Remember this, remember that. But after we came out, we were different people, and we felt uncomfortable sitting beside each other because all of us went through something. So I'm someone who I'm very thankful that despite the fact that I, was separated from emotionally and in terms of trust, from my family, from my extended family, that I was still brought up with teachings. My mother took us away here to Vancouver. That's why we ended up here, to get away from the residential schools. But what happened was a lot of her family and relatives were actually, lived over here on this side, but they were all intergenerational, all involved in alcohol, and she had to protect us from them. So we moved to Seattle, to our auntie's place in Seattle, and then we moved from there to California because Seattle wasn't far enough. So we came back. We moved there when I was 11 years old, and came back when I was 19. I was so depressed for years because I had so many friends in Los Angeles. It helped me to grow as a person, and I guess without bragging, I was part of a Chicano girls gang, and then, there was the guy side too, But I had my first ever sense of belonging to anything, because 2 years here in Vancouver, I experienced the worst racism of my life. I didn't know that I was different. Kids packed, driving around us on bikes, throwing rocks at our feet, and this kind of still happens today with a lot of kids. Oh, what was the question?
About how do we begin to repair the story?
Yeah, so I needed to share that because of this separation. Not even going into the things they did to us in the school to separate us from our same-sex siblings, pitting us against each other. So we ended up hating each other, resenting each other. So how do I repair as an Indigenous woman who's experienced residential school and intergenerational abuse as well? I fought hard for my sense of self. I fought hard for my confidence. I fought hard, to have a voice. I took theater, radio and television broadcasting at Columbia Academy. I took assertiveness training. Everything I could, I fought hard because I knew that I needed to be a voice for my people. I knew I needed to speak for my people who didn't have a voice like I didn't have a voice. And that comes from my mother, being a strong person, always giving us lectures, always talking to us and giving us the teachings. So for me, I had to learn, because I grew up away from my people. I grew up away from our beautiful, beautiful island. I grew up away from all that. But it was taking the family and community counseling course at Native Ed. They talked about trace memories. How many of you guys know about trace memories? Yeah, so trace memories, there are things that you don't know that you know. It's like twins who grew up separated. They have a lot of the same mannerisms. Kids that grew up away from their parents, when they finally meet, they like the same things. They like to, they like to drink, or they smoke, or they like to read the same kind of books. I believe that we all have that, all of us, but, I have to speak for my people. We know that our people are beautiful. We know that we walk on a beautiful land that's all covered up. My first poem was, our people were the very first to live upon this land, would live as one with our four-legged brothers, the mountains, air, and sand. The sun, our grandfather, the moon, our grandmother, and the sacred Mother Earth would teach their children many things, but are now for the white to search. They smother her with concrete, they drain her legs to mud, they drill from her and always will, till she dies for lack of blood. I've never been able to change it to something positive, but I just believe that we all need to do our own, like our young man here is doing his own research to learn. I went to my people, to my grandparents, talking with them, asking them questions. So it's up to us to ask those questions. It's up to us. We say, lot limited, lot limited, lot limited. You already know. You have the answers inside you. You know. You just don't know that you know. You have to work it for yourself. People tell you to go talk to your elders. Go ask your elders. Go talk to your elders. But today, a lot of our elders are still in pain. They're still suffering. They're still trying to heal. They're afraid to share because of the things that happened to them. So to me, it's up to each one of us to do our own learning and to find that in ourselves, and listen. Listening is the biggest gift that you can give to yourself. Can I share one more story? It's just, I have lupus, and no, I'll share this other one actually. My grandmother, she passed away, and in our culture, 4 years to have another big gathering. That's our sailors' custom. All the people come from all over that she's helped and their family has helped. And I couldn't make it because my son was sick. And I was okay, I'm not going to the island, my son was sick. But I still felt bad, and I hope they know that my son's sick. I'm not just there because I don't want to be there. And so I'm changing the rag on his head, and all of a sudden I hear, I'm on the 3rd floor of a house on Charles and Commercial. Now there are condos there. So I panicked. I'm like, ooh, sounds like there's someone coming in. But I thought, there's no stairs, there's no balcony. Oh, it's just the wind. Yeah, so I'm rocking my son. Oh, gee, what if someone has a ladder? So I put my son down and said, Mom, I'll be right back. I opened the curtain. When I opened the curtain, the window rattled again. I heard the wind, woo, like that. And the window, boom, it like exploded out. And I screamed. These 2 boys that were walking by, they screamed, they ran. And to make a longer story short, I'll move forward to the next day. My sister called and told me how everything went, how it went. There's so many people there. All I wanted to tell her was, guess what happened last night? And so it was really weird. And she goes, Kathy, what time was that? And I told her what time it was. And she goes, Kathy, you'll never guess what happened. That's the time they're showing our grandma's picture around the fire. That's a big, giant picture, the last time we could see her face. And they took it around. And then when they took her photo around, the family all following behind her, a big wind went through the big house. And she, oh, Kathy, it sounded just like that. And all people, ooh, they're making noise. And the fire was crackling and the ashes were flying up. And I started crying. I cried because I knew that what our ancestors tell us, our old people tell us, your ancestors walk with you. Your ancestors walk with you. Your ancestors walk with you. So that's when I learned to believe that, my grandmother, my sister said, Kathy, she was with you. She was telling you it's okay. I just felt loved because a lot of us in my generation and our next generation as well, a lot of us didn't really feel loved. Our parents were struggling emotionally, PTSD, depression, etc. So that's when I really felt loved. And I started to believe my mother because she said, you always learn everything the hard way. And we both start laughing.
Thank you. Okay, Woody,
How to restore it?
how to restore it in 10 words or less. Ready, go.
Well, see, you made a mistake when you asked me to say few words because in Haida that means 1 hour. No, to be able to restore our relationship with the land, we have to go back to our own values. In Haida, it's referred to as drawing a straight line to the highest values of the community, of the village. So instead of being good and bad, they're guidelines. And also, we're taught we're bad people. We're taught that women is a vessel of sin. We're taught that children should be seen and not heard. But in our original story, we don't have a creation story because we don't have a concept for bringing something out of nothing. In ours, it just tells how everything was brought into light. It was blue. In any way, that supreme being, if you would, is in 2 aspects, tangible and intangible. The intangible one we call Sungs'angals Hanwai. It sort of suggests something like air. It's invisible, it exists nowhere and brought everything into light. And the second aspect of it is tangible, Sungs'hanwai. And that sort of suggests atmosphere. You can always sense its presence. And also, the way we view them is that they're not, we don't pray to them, we'll put it that way. In 2001, I suffered a stroke. My whole right side was paralyzed. My dad's older brother, who lived to be 101, came to see me. And he said, in our way, we didn't pray to be restored because we don't know if that's what's meant to be. Instead, we'd call out, the Atlan Deo Kya Gong Gong. My spirit calls, take a look, see what I need. Then leave it at that. And also, we've forgotten the names of the spirits of the land. We've gone to looking at a supreme being as a king. We have to bow our heads. We always have to be scared of it. Sacred means fear. There's something hiding behind that cloud that if you break one of those 10 rules, going to stomp on you. but ours has no fear in it. And it said Hanwai is so big, it fills every corner of the universe and every fiber of my being. It's right here. It's not out there someplace else. This right here is my spirit house, my Hatnai. And so, when I'm feeling like if my girlfriend dumped me and I feel empty and hurt space here, that means I gave up my power. So I got to take it back. If another spirit steps in there, we call Ganil Hanwai, the medicine of confusion, the spirit of confusion. That's drugs and alcohol. And it said when that gets control, it's like a newborn child whose spirit is only very loosely attached and can leave at any time. So when that spirit steps in and gets into your house, only you can push it out. And once you push it out, then we can help you. But you got to leave it. You got to do it yourself. And then with the land, we talk a lot about land, but we don't understand that we have respect is something. If you don't have it, you'll never get it. When I go hunting, I never name the animal I'm going to hunt because I'm saying you have no say in this relationship. So I say I'm going to go take a look around. If it presents itself, I either accept the gift or I give this one back. I always give the first one back, so if somebody comes along after me, there's something for that other person. And when I step off the beach and into the woods, I talk to those small plants and say, I'm going to be passing through here looking for sustenance for my family. I may cause some of you distress or damage some of you, but please let me pass peacefully because I'm not here to hurt anyone. And if I come upon a bear's den, I rub my hands on the ground and I say to the spirit of that bear, I'm merely a human. Please permit me to pass peacefully. So we have to recognize the spirits in all of those things. The trees, Hanwai, the tree is the closest thing to the sun, and every one of them gathers energy from the sun in a different way. And when you release that energy, it's different. For example, with the hemlock, the western hemlock will provide heat on the coldest day, whereas the Douglas fir will also give lots of heat, but not as much as the western hemlock. It releases that energy differently. The Sitka spruce doesn't give much heat, but it's even, so you can cook with it. So you don't use the same wood for every ceremony. Every one releases it differently. The alder contains the essence of the woman. And so in the springtime, when the sap begins to run, if you listen to it, you can hear its heartbeat. And we're told that though we be men, we too have aspects of the female. And so when you're handling alder, always handle it carefully, because if you're not careful, it could slip from your hands. And so we didn't have any problem with gender. Gender was very simple. Sex are your genitals, and gender is who you use them with. So there was no all categories and all that. So there was gays in my village, but nobody paid any attention. The only time I ever heard reference was two old ladies were talking about somebody. And one said, "Who are you talking about?" She said, "You know that guy, the one with sugar in his shoes," because the way he walked had nothing to do with sexuality. So, and then the ocean, Agagwana. When we'd go out in the ocean, we'd talk to Agagwana. We had a song for it that says, we're going to travel to that island out there to gain sustenance for our family, so please keep your waves small. So we'd talk to that. The fresh water. Water is not just water. In Haida, this one we call Tlangaska. The Tlingit people call it Heen, but it's not the same thing. Our villages were never built by flowing water. They were always built where there's spring coming out of the ground. Ku'andlai. This is where life is coming out of the privates of the earth, bringing life. And that's what the doorway to the house represents, the woman's privates, because all life comes out. It's not to be lived inside. And a man must never enter without permission. And if he's invited to enter, he must always do it in such a way that when he leaves, if And the other person is honored that he'd been there. And if she provides him sustenance, he's supposed to sing for her. So we have those different plants, those different animals, they all have spirit. And so today we hear people saying, all my relations. Well, that's being a little bit impersonal. We say, di taolong, all my relatives. That's something different. That's all my relatives. And so I have to treat them like relatives. And we don't have a categories for animate and inanimate. Everything is animate. Everything has a spirit. This friend of mine, this Dr. Leroy Littlebear in Blackfoot, he was telling people, he said, you know, sometime you be coming around down a trail and here's a fluent Blackfoot speaker talking to a rock. Well, somebody didn't speak the language. They figured, well, he's kind of gone round the bend. Another Blackfoot speaker might join the conversation. So when we go among those things, you talk to it, like when you walk in the trees, you announce yourself and introduce yourself with a name that the land and the trees know you by. The name, I guess you'd say, that the wind is going to carry to the tops of the highest mountains and across the waters. So that's where you're saying, Di Taolong, all my relatives. And also, when there was one day I felt like my spirit was leaving, I was really fell in a dark hole, and I told my wife, go with me. And I went down to Jericho Beach, and I told her to wait here for me. And I went down, I took off my shoes and socks, rolled up my pants, and I walked out in the water about ankle deep, and I faced the north. That's the direction of healing. And it's the color black. Black is the comfort of darkness, where the things that can hurt me can't see me. It's sort of like returning to the womb. And it's a place of healing, because the cold, dry air would come from the glaciers and would clear up chest congestion. So I stood there real quiet, and I let my mind settle. And then pretty soon I could feel my spirit coming back. And so sometimes if you're lost, that's how you can reintroduce yourself to the land, is to stand quiet in that water, because that water represents, we don't have a line that divides the natural from the supernatural, from the spirit world. It's our ability to see it. And when you look at that water and you're trying to peer into the depths, if you see your reflection and you make a decision based on that, you're only making a decision based on what you think is true. But when you see that, that means you have to change your point of view. And so you keep moving until maybe the light's behind you, to where now not only can you peer down into the depths of the water, and then you become the water. And that's the hardest thing any human can do. It's called Gudungai Stichdong. This is a person who changed his mind, because we get fixed ideas about things, and don't confuse me with the facts my mind is made up. And so we have to have that open mind, and having an open mind means having a sense of humor, being able to laugh at yourself. And so when you can start seeing those things as your relatives, not just your relations, that's my relatives, those trees. All those trees, that's my grandmothers. When I'm hurting inside, I can go to my grandmother, any tree, and say, grandmother, I'm hurting. My spirit hurts. And she'll embrace me. If I'm feeling fear, I put my spine against a tree and I say, grandmother, I'm afraid. And she'll comfort me. And so, even when we were born, I always have the impression I was one of them, that I was born the 22nd of December, 1941. And so this was just before, I didn't start the war. I showed up 2 weeks later. But they would hold a baby up to the sky on a moonless night, starlit night, and introduce the child to all your relatives, and tell the stars people, this is your grandchild, look out for him. A grandchild, that's all your relatives. And when we were boys, we were about 12 or 13 years old, they took us out on a similar night and said, you know, there's people, when they look up at that, they tell themselves how small and insignificant my problems and I am when I look at that. He said, don't ever do that to yourself. When you look up there, you say, that's all my relatives. Now I'm as big as anything. So don't make yourself small. Some people are very proud of being humble. But humility is when you laugh at yourself, now you're being a person. So that's what it means. You have to return to being a person. And that's as short as I can get it.
I'm impressed. I'm impressed. I must say that.
Oh, that was a supreme effort.
I'm sorry, everybody, that we're going a little bit longer, but you can take care of your access needs as be. And Ronnie, I kind of wanted to, if you go on the same vein, or if you want to, I had a different question for you. But how is it that we change our way of thinking and working with each other?
I think we kind of already did. I mean, before COVID, I was the go guy. I don't know if anybody of you know my schedule. Any time of the day, my jobs switch. I had 3-4 jobs, and I was like constantly living out of my suitcase. So for the first time in my life, I just said, you know what? I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to raise my son. We're going to garden. We're going to research. We're going to read books. And it reminds me of a story. I went through my longhouse training in the house of Swanisset in Catesy. Swanisset is one of our epic heroes of the creation stories. Swanisset is responsible for the sockeye salmon coming up the Fraser River. Swanisset married the princess of the sockeye people. That relationship between Swanisset and the sockeye princess and the people was always reverent. It was always referenced and revered. That when the sockeye came back, everything stopped. Hunting, fishing, gathering. Even the kids would put down their toys. And everybody stopped as the first salmon went through, and they let those first salmon go through. And then all those bones are brought back as part of this sacred, ancient relationship. This principle, this value of the story, this ancient relationship and kinship between sockeye salmon and Swanisset and his people is actually the basis foundation of the sparrow versus the queen case in the Supreme Court. And so when we're looking at land, title, reverence, our understanding of the extrapolating these values and principles of legalities from our ancient stories and putting them into these Supreme Court cases. And this is for this land back stuff. We need to know the vibration of these stories and who they are. I went through my spiritual training in the House of Swanisset. House of Swanisset. Swanisset also climbed up to the upper world. And Swanisset interacted with the world above here. They call it Si Chitmuch, is the world beyond the sky. And up there, he met two people who ended up being the spiders. And so he ended up marrying that woman. And they came back to Earth. And she brought with her a box. And in that box, on one side of the box, was feathers. And she opened up the box. All the feathers turned into seagulls. And she opened up the other side of the box and she dumped it. And that's what became ulikins. And they came from the sky. And she was a spider, so she also taught people to weave the webs. And so my family, we grew up going to Catesy to find ulikins. And those ancient relationships, to me, I think, need to be explored and understood for us to recoup this balance in biodiversity. And these stories have been speaking to me, and how we teach these stories to our young people. How can we teach that idea of reverence? And the fact that if we can just go, hey, let's just all just hold on a sec while these salmon go by. Let's just all just hold on a sec while we recognize and acknowledge nature and these ancient kinships and relationships. And when people say, no, we can't do that, I call bullshit, because I seen the whole world stop during COVID. I saw the whole world go. And I kept thinking of those people stopping for those sockeye people. And I know that we can do it. If we did that once every week, just hold on, everyone, just hold on. We could actually create change. But we're under capitalism's pressures to produce and to be cool, to be the most woke, right? We need to shift our relationship to those things and understand that we're intruders upon this relationship between wild salmon and sockeye and sturgeon, because nobody mentions Oolikins and sturgeon, so I mention them all the time. And reframing how we do things. And so talking about Swanisset and talking about ancient gifts from the sky, I'm very honored to sit here with all of you. And I knew you guys were going to be here, and so I brought gifts from the river and from another place. And because of COVID, a lot of the herring eggs didn't go to Asia, and so I got a whole bunch of it for cheap and awesome. So I brought herring eggs and Oolikins for you guys. Because I love you guys. And I'm honored to sit here and speak with you. I'm a young guy in my mind. But these are Oolikins and herring eggs from this year, so I wanted to bring this to you guys, and that's how I'm going to end my time here. Thank you.
Thank you. What an amazing evening. I know we've kind of gone over time, and there was supposed to be an open moment. Thank you. A moment of questions for the audience. And there's a part of me that, I'm looking at Rosemary, but there's a part of me that I think what we have been given tonight, the gifts that we've been given, are the ones that will take us into dreams and one to savor. Is that, Donna, I can see you. That's good. Yeah. So thank you, everyone, for your time and for your hearts for coming here. Thank you. Thank you, Kat. Thank you, Ronnie Dean, always. I carry you in my teachings a lot when I travel around as well. Your name comes up a lot. And I want to thank Rosemary. I want to thank April. I want to thank Donna. I want to thank the tech team up there. Yeah. And all of you for coming to witness this. Thank you.
Thank you for accepting our gift.